And for the expert panel, we have Daniela Jaramillo-Dent with us. Jaramillo, where are you? Just let me see. Eugène Loos. We have Julian McDougall with us and Kristjan Kikerpill. If we can spotlight them just a second, then we can see who is in our expert panel. Yeah, I see Eugène, I see Julian. Daniela Jaramillo-Dent, are you here with us?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, good. Then we can spotlight you also.
Oh, yeah.
And also Kristjan Kikerpill, you are also here already. Yes, we can see you. Then we can add you. Okay, so this is our expert panel for today. A very warm welcome to the four of you. They will tell their thoughts and findings with regard to new horizons and challenges for media and resilience across generations. And we will start with Daniela, and I'm just gonna get a very short, I will mainly briefly introduce you. So Daniela Jaramillo-Dent is a doctoral student in the Inter-University Doctoral Program in Communication at the University of Huelva. Huelva? Do I say this right? Yeah. Her research explores discourse, representations, and narratives about immigration and social media platforms. Her academic background includes undergraduate and graduate studies in communication, education, and leadership. Her professional trajectory includes work as an educator and communicator in Ecuador, the US, and Spain. She currently works as a pre-doctoral research fellow at the University of Huelva and collaborates in the board of management for the peer-reviewed journal Comunicar.
Okay, good. So let's start. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. First of all, I would like to thank Maria Jose Brites for inviting me to be here today, and of course the organizers of this conference. I am an emerging scholar, and I'm today among experts in the field of media studies and media literacy, and I am honored and I am humbled to be here today among you. First of all, I would like to have a full disclosure. I am an immigrant myself, so I am biased in the topic that I will discuss, and that is important, you know, in research for positionality. But I wanted to talk to you about my research. I'm very passionate about it, and it discusses topics that are very personal to me, but also very important in society today. So I want to discuss how the experience of immigrants and the content creation by immigrants, specifically on TikTok, but on social media in general, constitutes a form of social media resilience against disinformation. So to do that, give me a second, I have a lot of things going on. Okay, so to do that, let's start talking about some of the assumptions we make in media literacy and media studies that sometimes are not applicable to immigrants, to some immigrants. First of all, the idea of reliable sources that we always discuss in media literacy programs, sometimes for immigrants are not as reliable or may not seem as reliable for many reasons. First of all, because of their countries of origin, the collapsed media industries in many countries where immigrants are fleeing. Also because of authoritarian governments who control the media in many countries. So the idea of reliable sources may not be the same for some immigrants. Also, in some cases, their voice and agency, of course, are excluded from the narratives about them, from the mainstream ideas about them. So they may not see these, we may not see these representations as accurate. Also, international agencies and government agencies, which we usually assume to be reliable, in many cases show representations of immigrants that are beneficial to their image as a public relations, public policy, and not always accurate from the perspective of those portrayed. Now, the aspect of voice and agency is interesting because we are always in the face of symbolic digital and material borders that exist, right? Now, immigrant populations are heterogeneous, but we are often presented as homogeneous, as clumped in groups to represent us in a way that may show that we live a very homogeneous experience, which is not true. Immigrants, as other people, are heterogeneous, are different, our experiences are varied and diverse. Even among those who could share the same documented status or undocumented status or come from the same country or region, there's diversity. Of course, the idea of vulnerabilities are also diverse, right? This is important because the willingness of immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers to create content online may be affected by these vulnerabilities and surveillance that they suffer. On the one hand, the fact that they may receive hate online, right, from creating content that may be seen as controversial. On the other hand, there are laws in Europe that enable governments to look at social media in order to establish the legal status of a refugee or asylum seeker, which may shape the content that asylum seekers are able to create. So this dissuades immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers and many people to create these types of content that tell stories that are different from the mainstream. So I think that creating content becomes a very courageous act and an act of resilience in the face of information that exists online. Now, my own research, I focus on narratives about immigration, but right now I am looking at 53 Latin American immigrant TikTokers in the US and Spain. And I am looking on one of the articles that is forthcoming about the platformed belongings, which reflect the ways in which immigrants use the affordances offered by the platform in order to connect with others and establish belongings. This can be with other creators, with other immigrants, with people with a similar background, etc. On the other hand, I've just had another article, which is also forthcoming, about immigrant influencers. So these are immigrants who have achieved a relevant following. And this is what I call the algorithmic invisibility, because they negotiate their visibility with the algorithm through very specific strategies that show also their resilience in the face of information that exists about them. So what do I mean by algorithmic invisibility? So I would say that the invisible part is very interesting because it's content that is under the surface. They are able to create content that may be controversial, for instance, describing how to enter a country as a tourist, but you are intending to stay, for example. There's a lot of content about this that is controversial, but it is presented through a humorous, musical, or choreographed content, which is part of the vernaculars of the platform in the case of TikTok. This is all done in a concealed way that enables them to trick the algorithm into picking up this content into the algorithmic wall and presenting it to a wider audience. They do this in order to present counter narratives to existing information about them. They do this to express affinity between them, to provide an individual account of collective experiences that are connected through these affordances. So something important, if you have never used TikTok, is that on TikTok, many of the affordances work in the same way as hashtags, which means that these contents are connected through different components. For example, audio. So audio on TikTok becomes an important source of storytelling and a source of subversiveness against information that exists, and also a way to become more visible through the visibility of others. So content that is visible and use a certain audio, if you use the audio again, your content is more possible that it will also become visible. So it's a form of platformed agency and platformed visibility to deploy their own voice and agency. So I brought one example because of the time limitation, but let's see what we can see here. So here we see a song that has been used many thousands of times on TikTok, and it was created by a TikToker, a Spaniard, who is actually a native Spaniard, so she's not an immigrant. But it has been appropriated by the immigrant community and reused several times. So this is present in the US and Spanish sample, and the lyrics are in Spanish, but they say something like this. Immigrants don't come to take your job away. They are doing jobs that you don't want. This myth must be nipped in the bud. While you're at home, they're lifting the country. You're sleeping, happy, receiving public aid, while they are contributing in order to get you paid. So this, of course, tackles several information pieces that are in the imaginaries of people, specifically in Spain, this is true. But of course, it is also applicable to the US. This idea that immigrants are taking public aid, And this is not true because immigrants are also working, and it is a varied group, mainly, is that diverse experience. So this is an interesting example because also visually you can see how they are all following the platform vernaculars, which involve lip syncing in this case, looking at the camera and pointing. So visually, you see some similarities, but also some things that are individual. For example, the use of different effects. One of them uses some hearts that are falling. Another one is like a wrapper. So all of this shows how this platform enables a collective experience told from a very individual voice that reflects this diversity that exists in the migrant experience. So this is my argument to talk about these diverse experiences of resilience on social media and how information can be experienced differently depending on your role, whether you are the one being portrayed or you are the one consuming content. So I hope it was useful, and I look forward to your questions.
I would like to give the floor to our next expert panel, that is Eugène Loos. Eugène is an associate professor of public administration and organizational science. And in his research, he focuses on the accessibility of reliable digital information for all citizens. Currently, Eugène Loos is leading international research projects on COVID-19 fake news to get insights into the effectiveness of legal, technological, and educational measures to help citizens to engage critically with their news sources and promotes access and use of reliable digital information. I'm very curious, Eugène, to hear your thoughts on this topic. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm a bit nervous about the PowerPoint. I tried to share my screen. I'm in home office and my internet connection is not so good. Already glad you can see and hear me. Now I try to share my screen.
If it doesn't work, we have your presentation ready for sharing if you want.
But I think it's a miracle. I think it's working. One second. We'll see if you can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
So it's visible for you, huh?
Perfect.
Incredible. Today it worked. So in the 10 minutes, I'll try to tackle several topics. So it's about fake news, fighting fake news, a generational educational approach. And I will go through several topics you see here. So first of all, what is fake news? Well, the notion of fake news is very difficult to define. And if you're interested in this, I can only recommend Tartu et al., who several years ago already covered this notion of fake news. After that, a lot of things happened. Other peoples proposed other notions, misinformation, disinformation. We don't have time to go through that now, but I'm aware of that this notion is criticized. But for the moment, I think a lot of people, especially the non-academic people, really are familiar with the term fake news. Well, Tartu et al. Said there is facticity and deception that is important for this notion. So to which degree fake news relies on facts? And that's of course a problem. Who's going to decide what is a fact, what is true and what is not true? And the other dimension is that fake news intends to mislead. So it's really the intention to mislead other people. These are two important dimensions. It's a great article. He was one of the first with his colleagues to write it. So if you're interested, go there. Then the question, is fake news a new phenomenon? Well, the answer is no. It is a great cartoon from the 18th century, and it is Edward Jenner, a British physician, who is vaccinating people against smallpox. And so this is this picture about this British physician vaccinating people, and you see people have grown cow's ears, cow's legs, and so already at that time is there is kind of misinformation, fake news about a very important topic. So nothing changed in all these centuries. So I guess you can't see the next slide now, is it? Oh, it's working. Okay. So it's not new. What is new, of course, is the social media that makes it easier to produce and distribute fake news at high speed. And many people warn, of course, that this can lead to misinformation, but is deceitful and very harmful and even hateful. I think it's clear that we should fight fake news, but I want to stress that news is extremely important. It is even a so-called primary good. Rawls wrote an interesting book about this, a classic seminar. So this primary good, news is really a primary good. And if you don't have access to reliable information, you have a problem as a citizen. Well, I just launched a website, technically made by Anna, we all know. Thanks again, Anna, for the real good work to technically make this website for me. And it's about legal measures, technological measures, and educational measures to fight fake news. Some people are very optimistic about these legal measures. Example, the European Union, there is a code of practice, and they have forced Facebook, Twitter, and Google to produce monthly report on the fight against fake news on their platforms. In the beginning, they refused, but in the end, they understood the pressure was so much. So now they try to delete fake news on their platforms, and they have experts doing that. Problem, we are not sure if such legal measures really work. And of course, what kind of criteria do the experts use to delete fake news? There is also something like freedom of speech. So where is the limit between truth and not truth? The other one is the technological measures. So you have traditional fact-checking by hand, which is not doable anymore, and you have innovative technical detection. Their algorithms are used, and the algorithm will decide if something is true or fake. Same problem. Who makes these algorithms, and what criteria are hidden in the algorithms? I'm starting a project and looking for articles. There are many of them which present such software, and asking the authors about the algorithm, because they don't describe this very much in their papers. So it will be an upcoming project. So the problem here, who's going to decide on the criteria for determining the truth of online information? Is it the state, the judges, platform companies, the press? Who are those experts? And even if it's and especially if it's an algorithm, it's not visible anymore. So I personally believe more in the third kind of measures, educational ones, to empower citizens that in the long run, if you start at a young age, that in the long run, they are able to decide themselves what is true and what is not true for them. But of course, this takes time. This is a disadvantage. And you can start at primary school, but what to do about people already older, like us, for example? We didn't have such education and media literacy trainings. So now, especially now with COVID-19, there are many dangerous news myths. And there is an excellent website by the WHO who's talking about an infodemic crisis, and has an excellent website where they show all those myths related to COVID-19. And I'm sure they are also in your own country. Well, the WHO presents them and then tries to counter them. There are other initiatives in the past focusing on media literacy practices in Europe. And I myself, with two colleagues, Alexander Dumitru and Loredana Ivan, we are going to submit a paper where we present such media literacy practices and interventions, and to see what their impact is and if it's evidence-based. I can already tell you it's not evidence-based most of the times. No, we don't know if they are working or not. So that's why in Utrecht University we have an EU consortium that we are going to we are working on, to try to set up, to see if we can set up empirical studies to compare effectiveness of more traditional cognitive media literacy training versus more interactive ones. So the cognitive ones, the pupils, who get the training, often at primary school, they are passive. The teacher is going to tell them, to warn them about fake news. But there are other possibilities I call more interactive. They can play a game, for example, digital game, to make them aware of the dangers. Or they even create fake news themselves to see how this process is going. And we would like to compare this. So with some school classes getting a more traditional one, and some school classes an interactive one in several European countries, and also longitudinal. So to check the impact after 1 month, but also after, for example, 1 year, to see if those who got one of the two trainings are more able and more empowered than if you got the other training. Now in the direction to the role of age. So there's a lot of stuff on young people. We know that. And there are several media literacy programs like the New Literacy movement. But what about older people? Well, it's not clear at all how important age is for the vulnerability to fake news. We don't know. So Maria-José Bright had this wonderful paper and also checked at all kinds of documents from the EU. And it's even there is not much attention to the generational aspect. It is very often focused to younger ones and not so much to other age groups. That's why we tried to, with another colleague, Nijenhuis, I wrote a paper, and we posted political fake news stories and to check who is going to believe this. They made all kinds of comments, and there you saw that all age groups were involved, even older ones more. There was a tendency that older people believed more these political fake news stories. On the other hand, we should repeat this with other kinds of stories, because it was political fake news, and maybe this has to do that younger people are not so interested in political fake news, but that's an assumption, of course. So we should repeat this for other types of fake news stories, but all age groups, many of them believed those political fake news stories posted on Facebook. Almost there. If you're interested in this topic, we have, of course, on the one hand, the beautiful SMaRT toolkit at the core of this final conference. And I have my own website about how to tackle this fake news related to Corona fake news. It's called Corona in the Netherlands, but it's bilingual. It's also about COVID-19, of course. Internationally, it's COVID-19. So, in this website with the how to stop Corona fake news, there's 3 pillars: legal, technological, and educational are there, with a lot of links. I made available all these kinds of studies and also links to trainings that people can do their own training. And to conclude this, I don't want to suggest that I'm against legal measures or against technological measures. And of course, I'm much in favor of the educational ones, but probably it's such a complex problem that we should combine the 3. But for all 3 measures, it is important that people are empowered, and there is no such thing as the state or the judges or a Google who's going to decide what is right or wrong. And for each pillar, this plays a role, of course, and we should be aware of this and try to, once again, try to empower people of all ages so that they can decide themselves the distinction between right and fake.
Also brings us perfectly to our next speaker, Julian McDougall, who will be talking about media literacy. So Julian is a professor in media and education, head of the Center for Excellence in Media Practice, and leads a professional doctorate in creative and media education at Bournemouth University. He convenes the annual International Media Education Summit and is the author of over 100 books, articles, chapters, and research reports on media education and media literacy. In 2021, Julian has been provided digital and media literacy research and consultancy to ITV, BBC Media Action, and for the European Commission's Digital Education Hub, and published his latest book, Critical Approaches to Online Learning. Happy to have you here, Julian, and curious to learn more from you on media literacy. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be invited to talk, and the previous two presentations were so good. I'm slightly anxious about the quality of my own. Now in full screen? Okay, I think some of my ideas were very well articulated by the previous two speakers, which is a good thing in terms of the cohesion of the panel. And some of the projects that we've been involved in my centre were mentioned in the introduction. So I'm not going to talk about specific projects or specific research findings, but I'm going to try to group those things together and suggest a theory of change for media literacy, and a theory of change which takes us beyond solutionism. And the reason why I say that is because I think we can all recognise here that media literacy is not the solution. The solution is the way that we help people to use their media literacy for positive change. Many of the people in the world who we might agree are doing the worst things, with their media literacy, whether that's attempting to influence the outcomes of elections, whether it's developing deep fakes, whether it's developing algorithms that use people's data in ways that they wouldn't be happy about, whether it's to do with surveillance capitalism and using algorithms and artificial intelligence to infringe civil liberties, or whether it's making fake news, disinformation, social media posts about vaccines. These people are highly media literate. Donald Trump is highly media literate, and so on. So you get the idea. Media literacy is not a set of neutral competencies that you either have or you don't have, and it's not the solution. The solution is the uses of media literacy for positive social change. And this, I think, links quite nicely with the previous conversation after Eugène's talk. I'm going to show you a video of an old film directed by Herzog called Where the Green Ants Dream. This is just the trailer, and I'll explain why after I've shown you.
We're going to be blasting again soon. You got to move. Boom, boom, quick, quick, understand?
This is the place where the green ants dream.
Ants! Green ants! Dreaming here?
Well, it's not visible, but there's nowhere else in Australia where the Earth's magnetic field is so abnormally distorted.
And you've measured that?
Yes, yes, of course. And because the green ant is the only living creature on Earth with a sensory organ attuned to magnetic fields, like a small green living compass.
Tell me, what is the clever attack? Because we have been here for 40,000 years, longer than you camps.
Well, that's an option we've not considered, naturally. But you must absolutely understand that we will take legal steps.
Here, you talk about progress over and over again. And where does it lead the Aborigine? It is progress into nothingness.
Order. This court is not a forum for political oratory.
Okay, you may be familiar with this film or the way that the French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard wrote about it in his book, The Différende. But in that book, Lyotard talked about what we might now consider to be a situation of post-truth. He talks about the postmodern condition. And he wrote about this notion of the differond, which is where you have two completely competing views of reality that cannot be reconciled. He talks about language games, and you cannot understand the truth without adopting the idioms of one language game over the other. In this case, the Aborigines believe that the dreaming of the green ants keeps the world moving. So literally, if the green ants stop dreaming, the world will end. That they believe that. The Australian mining company do not believe that. They believe in scientific rationality and progress. And so they want to mine into the land, which the Aborigines believe will end the world. There is no possible way of reconciling those two perspectives, those two ontologies. But of course, Lyotard writes about this as a positive thing, that we should respect the Aborigines' beliefs, that we should try to work towards a philosophy of difference, where we think about every moral, ethical decision by trying to reconcile as many different competing notions of truth or different competing notions of reality as possible. So we could argue, in a situation, this is echoing, books about Russia, nothing is true, everything is possible. We could argue that we're kind of in a situation where what Lyotard proposed has come true in a kind of bad way, or similarly Foucault, or all of those kind of post-structuralist theories. But what it tells us is that notions of using media literacy to expose the truth, to expose falsehood rather, so we can see the truth, are always going to be flawed, because what media literacy has always been about is encouraging people to understand that this is not a pipe, that we are always looking at a representation. We are never looking at reality when we engage with media or digital information in the current moment. So I like to use this old painting by Magritte as well, when I start out with media literacy training or media literacy courses, to say, this is the point. This is not a pipe. This is a representation. This is an image. From this point, we can move forward. It's not about trying to expose the truth of the pipe. It's understanding that it's not the pipe is the key point. I realize you don't need me to tell you this audience, but I'm just trying to kind of move back into a foundational kind of moment for thinking about media literacy in a different way, perhaps. So we are, I think, we would mostly agree in this state of information disorder. And then in the COVID times, we could call that an infodemic. People talk about the perfect storm where various things combine. So we have confusion, cynicism, fragmentation, irresponsibility, and apathy. Or we could look at the combination of technology and networks and austerity politics and polarization and data and surveillance and capitalism. And then you throw in a global pandemic to the mix as well. It's a pretty serious situation for the media and the media and information ecosystem. And of course, we know, and I would include my own country in this now, the UK, there are countries where politicians are actively exploiting this situation to obscure truth and increase a state of confusion and cynicism. And so media literacy is often offered up as a solution. And for those of us that work in the media literacy field, that's a good thing. There's funding, there's opportunities, there's credibility for our work, but it's also deeply problematic to suggest that media literacy in itself can solve all of these very kind of complicated problems. So I want to think for a few moments now about media literacy as being like a vaccine. So first of all, we're diagnosing the virus, which is the infodemic or information disorder. But the point is, and this is quoting my PhD student, Phil Barber, who's researching the aesthetics of alt-right and kind of conspiracy movements in YouTube and other social media spaces as well. He says countercultural narratives wants to preserve of the left have become a characteristic now of extreme and paranoid conservative, neoconservative alt-right movements. In other words, if you want to respect the beliefs of the Aborigines that the green ant streaming makes the world go around, you also have to respect the views of QAnon. You can't have it both ways. You cannot retreat into a situation of truth over falsity if you also want to respect the most diverse and kind of fluid and negotiated approaches to truth itself. It's a conundrum, it's a paradox, it's a problem for us. So my suggestion for a theory of change, if you want to think about media literacy as being like a vaccine, is that it goes from efficacy trials to a booster shot. It has 4 stages. The trials are when we look at who has access, And by access, I don't just mean to technology, I mean full, informed, educated, equal, diverse access to a plural media ecosystem. When you look at the detail, not that many of us actually have that. So that's a problem. The first shot would then be awareness. This is not a pipe. Everything is representation, or to go back to the kind of Stuart Hall classic kind of cultural studies approach, everything is always a site of kind of conflict and contestation in popular culture and information. Then the second shot, though, is important. That's capability. Now, that's what I would call the uses of media literacy, but it doesn't include a moral dimension. In other words, you could have full access, good awareness, and high levels of capability, but use all of that for negative things, for bad ends, for exploitation, manipulation, monetization, radicalization, polarization, as many Asians as you want in terms of the way the word goes. And then the booster shot then, for me, is when you start to inject this notion of consequences. What are the consequences of your media behaviors? What are the consequences of the way you want to use your media literacy? How are you going to make the world a better place? And then we get back into that conversation about democrats being made rather than born. So that's the important element, I think, in shifting our focus to the morality that we need to associate around media literacy. So it's not this, it's not about fact or fake, true or false, but it's this. This is not a pipe. Everything is in play, everything is representation. So the question is, how are you going to engage mindfully with representations? And then how are you going to use your own digital media literacy as an activist to represent yourself and others around you in a way that makes the world better, more equal, more fair? So people who are fully media literate, fully vaccinated, if you like, have full and safe access, critical awareness, capability, and then the critical understanding of the consequences of their actions in the ecosystem and how to use their capabilities for positive consequences. And I would say I got very excited about the first presentation of this panel because that was exactly the kind of research and practice that I'm talking about there. Very much about how can people in particular situations create content as an act of resilience, inputting their content into the ecosystem, making a contribution, a kind of dynamic media literacy intervention, if you like. So I would like to credit and reference our first speaker with, that's the kind of example I mean of consequential media literacy. To conclude then, this is the theory of change that we've developed. This is for BBC Media Action, but we're now trialing it with a number of different kind of stakeholders and groups. And there's two cross-cutting themes at the top of from BBC Media Action's work: strengthening media ecosystems and reducing information disorder. And what this theory of change does is it actually kind of pins down, or attempts to pin down, how those four elements of media literacy: access, awareness, capability, and consequences, can contribute to both of those two important objectives. But again, to conclude, media literacy itself is not the solution. It's capability with consequences that will help us make the world a better place through media literacy, if we can.
Just to introduce Kristjan Kikerpill is a PhD candidate at the University of Tartu, where his main research focuses are on individuals' role in preventing cybercrime and developing strategies for social engineering attacks. Very interested to hear what I could do on an individual level. Kristjan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me and for all the interesting presentations. It was somewhat difficult to keep track because I had so many questions and so many points that overlap with my own findings and my own thinking. So it was really interesting. So I'll now share the screen. Okay, right. So the first question: why crime is communication? So first of all, we've had this theme of is it new or is it old? And actually, a lot of crimes that we consider to, let's say, reside in this quote unquote meat space, so not the cyberspace, is they have a communicative element to it. But there are also criminal offenses like criminal threats or giving false testimony that are actually purely communicative in their nature. So all you have to really do is be in a specific setting and say specific words, and you've committed a crime. So that's one of these approaches. The other problem, which became clear during my PhD studies and especially the literature review, is that the frameworks in criminology that are most popular currently for studying cybercrime are from the late 1970s. So this is a time where these frameworks were, when they were created, they contributed a lot to the field of criminology, but they have never been entirely successful in actually explaining what it is that we're seeing with cybercrime. So they've tried, and these discussions have been ongoing since the turn of the century. But whenever you come up on a study that uses these theoretical approaches, you're more likely to receive non-results. We didn't find anything, we didn't see any connections. So this is I would say, a problem of mindset. So criminologists or people dealing with this issue are still working from robbers looking for victims on the street type of mindset. So they are looking for physical contact and action, and they're trying to transpose it into a mediated setting, even though they very rarely emphasize the importance of communication in their studies, even though from my perspective, at least, everything in a mediated setting is nothing but communication. So therefore, if crimes occur there, then they are essentially communication. So what we need to move towards, in my opinion, is this understanding of mediated contact and interpretation. This is the same thing we've already been discussing, because whether or not you fall victim to one of these scams actually comes down to how you interpret the incoming communication that you're receiving. Can you sort of distinguish between, let's say, just informational stuff, whether it's relevant for you or not, and what of it is criminal, right? And so the third aspect is really, what really sort of brought it together for me is understanding just how alone we are when criminals contact us. So for example, right now here we're discussing, I'm speaking and everyone can hear me. And if I say something suspicious, you can sort of open up your chat and ask another participant, hey, did this sound suspicious to you? But for example, consider the situation where I'm sending, let's say, an email to Anna or Julian, right? So if I'm sending them an email, how could someone else sort of protect them from what is inside that email, right? So there is no 24/7 access to other people's communications. So what we have to understand is just how alone we are. We can do preventive things, of course, be proactive about it. This is exactly where media literacy comes in. And we can do, of course, reactive things. So provide victim care, make sure our media environment sort of is not victim blaming and so on. So raise awareness on that front as well. Okay, so now to take this social engineering attacks through step by step, there are 3 steps. These sort of easy to notice steps, or what you could use if you're planning on doing an awareness campaign. So the first thing really is that don't get stuck on a specific channel. So the only thing criminals need to sort of siphon money from you or data from you is to get in touch with you. So there is no rule against, let's say, phones or emails or text messages, social media, even face-to-face, right? But so there are this. So emails are the easiest to study because there's just so many of scam emails around. And now we're just moving into, let's say, studying phone calls, which is phishing or voice phishing, SMS or text messages, phishing, and so on. So this is just beginning to sort of unfold. And we don't really have too much information about it just yet. But here I've placed a table from a study that myself and my supervisor conducted about news stories about scams, COVID-19 related scams from early 2020. And so you can see the sort of very simplistic distribution of channels used to perpetrate and send these messages. And you can see that only about half our emails. And so let's say a strong 40% is some other source. And so we need to be aware of that, because even though the literature on, let's say, security awareness campaigns is quite limited, one thing that has been brought up as an issue or as a point of discussion is the fact that if you teach people that scams come in emails, then that's exactly what they will understand, and they will, be aware of one channel and be very well aware of it, but maybe completely unaware that you can do the same thing with a text message. So this is an important point, sort of take home point from this. So the second step we can recognize a social engineering attack is that the communication or the incoming communication at some point, whether this is just one message or it's a longer interaction, at some point there has to be a request for specific action. So your sort of a conversation partner or email respondent somehow has to ask you to do something, whether it's to click a link or imply that you should open this attachment or maybe visit this website. There has to be a request for action, because social engineering is interactive in that sense. They're not just victimizing you just how you are. You have to do something about it yourself, and then this is what, let's say, makes this even more difficult, or makes it more important that people understand their own role in staying safe, is that it's about them. Criminals will always try to get in contact with you, try to lure you to do things that are not beneficial to you, but you have a very active role in preventing that. So, and they're always trying to sort of control this communication process, whether it's brief or whether it's extensive, and they're directing you towards a specific path of action as communication, because each of these clicks on links or opening a website is just requests and responses, and what we make of the user interface that displays this information to us. So it's all taking place in a communicative framework. It's just that some of this we understand or interpret as crimes. And yep. And so the third step, which is this is also quite easy to grasp or to take away from any messages, whether you're being lured or appeal to your sort of softer side, or whether you're being threatened, right? So there's always this table from the same study which shows that this sort of a good Samaritan approach, or offering you something you need or want, was clearly dominant over the second one, the shock and awe, where we try to scare you into doing something really quickly. So it's an interesting finding, because usually people place more relative weight on the losses that they might experience than the gains that they might obtain. But here, since it was in the context of COVID-19, the social circumstances themselves probably provided more opportunity for criminals to do these offer-based scams. So all these things that we needed, masks, personal protective equipment, there were already, scams for vaccines and different remedies already, in the start of 2020, where vaccines were just, a bright blue dream for people. So they all existed already back then, and so these social circumstances provided a setting where luring people or being the good Samaritan with your non-existent let's say supply of masks and whatever they may be that people need or want, made it easier for scammers to do their scams based on this positive approach, or this luring approach. And so the last thing, just one more slide. So I've been talking about this crime in the message. So this is how it's perpetrated, but what's most interesting to me, and really what my thesis concentrates on as well, is context. So context, it has at least two dimensions. So one is the interpretive, which helps us understand the messages that we're receiving, right? And the other one is the constitutive dimension. So it helps us craft messages that fit the specific circumstance. So why this COVID-19 social circumstances were so interesting to me, first when I started noticing that these scams started appearing, which was, you know, mostly at the start of February, it was really interesting to see how they either the scammers either changed existing, let's say, formulas for scams to reflect the COVID-19 circumstances, or they actually created entirely new ones. So for example, there's an example from the UK was a text message was distributed and suggested that a person had violated lockdown rules and must now pay a fine, so which was entirely bogus. But it's very difficult to sort of, let's say, imagine getting that message, even if it is scam and even if it is fake, if there were no COVID-19 related lockdown measures in place. So there's these examples specific to the COVID-19 circumstances, and I would say that moving forward, it's exactly this constitutive dimension of context with scams that we need to pay attention to, whether it is local, global, supranational. It usually appears, during tax season or commercial holidays when these things sort of amp up considerably. But there are also other events that we may need to further study, that what it is about the social circumstance or a social context that exceeds, let's say, this threshold for when scammers start using it when developing their own scam messages. Thank you. I'm open for any questions.